rather than thinking, what position do I want to be in, or what status do I want, or what salary do I want to be on, think, what do I want my day to look like?
Hmm.
Because that's far more important and far more immediate than any of these kind of second order things recover from. So being able to recognize, like, okay, I'm doing enough for this goal, and actually adding more is not going to be helpful. How can I take these units of energy and input and turn them into something that's going to be more productive? And I think in most athletes' case, that's going to be, how can I recover harder? A lot of it is just about managing our behavior and staying accountable, even to ourselves, like you said with your calendar, to just make sure that we turn up and do the thing.
All right, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another brand new Rugby Muscle podcast. As always, TJ, and today we've got Yusef from Propane Fitness joining us. Yusef, do you even know like much about rugby itself before
Oh
we even get
man,
into
last time I played rugby was when I was made to at school
it?
in the winter. I've just got bad memories of being freezing and like when you get like kicked in the ear or in the like or
Oh,
in the hand or something, and you just,
yep.
yeah,
What
it
position did you
wasn't a
play?
full back.
That's even the worst. I remember playing so many games at school where it would just was freezing it down, and they'd make like some of the footballers come play because that was the only way we could get a team. And the poor bastards standing at fullback or on the wing would just freeze because we weren't good enough to pass it out to the wing.
Yeah,
But
that was exactly it. And combined with the fact that I can't catch a ball for any amount of money, and it was just, yeah, it was one of those things that was like, if it's too cold, you have to do cross country running. If it's just cold, you got to play rugby, and I wasn't built for it either as a kid. So
oh
yeah, I've
man,
not got good memories of it.
I used to hate cross country running so much because I would be slow and fat enough that I'd be in the fat group, but or no, I was too fast to be in the fat group. Sorry, but I was the slowest of the non-fat people. It was just a complete nightmare.
It's
And now
whether you want to
looking back,
be
I'd
a
love
big
I'd love to
fish
do
and
cross country.
really,
Oh
it was
yeah,
like, it was the teacher's cop out. I thought, like, when they couldn't be bothered, they were like, right guys, just go and run around the field and come back in 3 hours.
yeah, definitely. I think that's also like why rugby sort of dropped down in schools as well, because it's one of the most harder ones to one of the most complicated sort of sports and risky to teach, especially with all the controversy that's going on. So obviously rugby is not why we've got you on the podcast. Got you on the podcast because, well, I mean, you've accomplished a fair bit, and I'll sort of want to, as what I've been doing with this podcast, is just pick the brains of people that I find interesting, that I think all of our listeners will get lessons from, and there is a lot of shared sort of thought processes that go behind it. But could you describe who you are and what you do in like 2 sentences, and then I'll probably feed off of that and big you up even more.
Sure. So thank you for having me on, by the way. And I think you guys will have to excuse my bunged up voice at the minute. I've got a bit of a head cold. I've got a negative COVID test today, so I am a COVID negative doctor, gymnast, powerlifter, and the what's kind of brought TJ and myself together, I think, was that me and my business partner Johnny set up a online coaching company a few years ago, and over time we've pivoted as well into helping coaches build their online presence. Um, so there's definitely stuff that we can discuss about kind of selling your expertise, as well as the journey that's accidentally led us to this point.
Yeah, it's definitely what sort of drew me to what you guys do, but more like you specifically for this. How I think you'll be useful in this podcast is like sort of the real diverse realms that you've sort of achieved expertise in, because you weren't all you're a medical doctor, but obviously you're a fitness business owner, and now you're a fitness business owner. uh you know when you're talking about strength training, um you've accomplished a shit ton in those sort of realms, as well as not just powerlifting, but as you said, gymnast and those are sort of seem to be competing goals. And then we've also got the other side, the real yin side of things, where it's you've done meditation retreats, I believe, and it's like all of these sort of diverse realms like seem to be something that a person would use as one area or one thing, and that would be their identity. So that, you know, you get a lot of people that consider themselves powerlifters, or they consider themselves a doctor, or they consider themselves whatever. You seem to have tried to achieve as many different things in as many different diverse realms as you can. Like, is there any sort of reasons for that? Like, what two or three things could you attribute that to,
I would
if
put
you
it down
could?
to greed, to be honest. Greed and obsessional curiosity. I appreciate the kind words about that. I think a lot of it just comes from wanting to perpetually turn over lots of stones and be like, oh, what's under this and what's under this, and although there's a lot of value in going deep and hard into something and going to the kind of the elite level, I think there are diminishing returns. And with most things, you can get to, say, 80% of expert level
Mm-hmm.
in a lot shorter time than a lot of people think. And so I think now I'm very, very grateful that we have the luxury to do that with the internet, with the just the pace of information and availability of stuff that we can do now, that we can look at anything you want to get better at, unpick the fundamental principles of it, and just go to town with it. And so I think really for me it is just greed. It's just wanting to just taste a bit of every pie. It's kind of like turning up at a buffet and you see there's so much stuff available that you're just like, oh man, what about this, and how does this interact with this?
Mm-hmm.
And then as a result, I guess the businesses and the kind of social media stuff that comes about as a secondary effect is really just a function of documenting and monetizing the reading and the journey that you do. And I think everybody has some specific expertise in a certain field. Particularly you, for example, and yours is a kind of overlap and like a Venn diagram of two areas that normally have their own dogma and set of rules and principles
Mm-hmm.
that that rugby does, and then but there's the world of strength training, and actually I think both worlds have a lot to learn from each other, and very few people are kind of overlapping the two properly. So I think there's a
Yeah.
lot to be
Yeah,
a lot to
I
be gained
think
from that.
where your buffet analogy sort of falls short, though, I think, is that like you say that you don't want to go deep, but in order to get to 80%, you can't. It's not a case of, and I think this is where most people run into problems. And again, this is the sort of the layover to rugby strength and conditioning, is like when you've got all these different diverse realms. And we'll look at like a sport like CrossFit, where people try to do everything at the same time. That tends to never work. And what I think what you've done is you'll get enough, you'll go deep enough just to get to 80%. But then if you go any deeper, like it becomes, like you say, it's like that curve of diminishing returns or whatever. Like once you get to 80%, everything, every single percent higher you try to achieve of mastery is just like exponentially more difficult,
So
right?
much, and it has to cannibalize other parts of yourself too. And so I think exactly as you say, knowing when to stop with something is probably harder than doing the thing itself.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
in the analogy, in the strength analogy, like someone who wants to go from
Body weight bench press,
yeah, so
something like that. Like,
yeah, you look at someone who's like they've never set foot in a gym and you say, mate, like if you just got from 0 to a 60 kilogram bench press, you'd be doing all right. And
mm-hmm,
then if you took that from a 60 to a 100 kilogram bench press, you'd look quite muscular. Take that from a 100 to a 140, so 3 plates, you'd be doing really well. Taking that from there to 180 and then to 220, like then you start to really run into like the amount of weight that you'd have to gain to maintain those strength gains and the shoulder injuries that you're putting yourself at risk of and all that stuff. It starts to really start to impact that. Same with rugby. That you could say the same with squats. You know, going from one plate to two plates, it's going to help with your
Hmm.
running speed, your jump height, your explosiveness. But by the time you're squatting 300 kilos, like you're so specialized that it's not worth the trade off.
This is the thing that no one wants to hear as well. Like you said, it is actually, it's weird, but it is probably the most difficult thing. The amount of like big, heavy, strong guys that are naturally like, or they're not, maybe they're not naturally, maybe they've worked their ass off to get that strong. They're so eager to keep doing that because that's what's got them to the dance. But at the end of the day, like I've said to so many people, I'm like, in theory, like, and I'm not going to say to do this because you enjoy your training, but you could literally not go do any weightlifting for the next 2 years and you would still make progress. So people don't want to hear that because they're very scared of, I don't know, maybe the work they've put in, losing that.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think the other part of that is, as you say, if you've got someone who's like identifies as the big
Yeah.
strong guy or whatever, he leans into what's easy for him. And you see the same if anyone listening's ever been to like a yoga class, and you'll have like the flexible girls will go and sit at the front and they'll do a hamstring stretch. Just and it's because that's where they're comfortable. Like they don't the last thing they need to be doing is a hamstring stretch, but they're doing it because it's partly showing
Yeah.
off and it's partly leaning into their strengths. When really doing the kind of grisly, horrible stuff that we know is our weakness is really where the gains come, but it's quite unpleasant to train that stuff.
For sure. And it's quite, it's an unpleasant like splash of water on the face to say, right, this is so much harder to get any further. Why even bother? Like, why not just change, not necessarily completely flip the goal on its head or whatever, but look for somewhere else that you might actually get a lot more fruit. So I think, were you in finance before you became a doctor?
Yeah, so I worked in an investment bank or a asset management firm
Okay.
before
And
before medicine.
what flipped that? What made that decision? Like, had you got to your 80% of financial mastery?
I don't know about that. I think finance goes pretty deep, but
Yeah.
I read a chapter in a book called The Way of the Superior Man by David Dada, and there was a part in there that was talking about your life purpose kind of falling away like layers of an onion, and at each stage in your life, the outer layer kind of falls off, or it becomes like crispy and hold. And if you
Hmm.
try and hold on to that outer layer, you're not being authentic to yourself. And it was saying that whatever you're doing in your life has to kind of go through this natural evolution. And the longer that you hold on to something that's not in line with your purpose, the more people sense that inauthenticity.
Hmm.
And so I think the other chapter was live as though your father was dead. And the idea there is not about your physical father, but the point is we often do a lot of things, we make a lot of career decisions and life decisions based on what our culture and our society and our religion and all these things have been telling us to do.
Hmm.
And we're trying to live in the shadow of getting approval from society rather than following what our purpose is.
And so you just thought, like, why am I helping people out with money? This isn't important. I want to help people with their health.
Yeah, it was kind of a continuation of the stuff that we've been doing with Propane, which is our coaching company. That it's the fundamental model there is that you've got someone who you're helping optimize their body by applying a body of evidence and series of recommendations to them. And so kind of the natural consequence of that is clinical medicine.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe you could argue more of a kind of American style functional medicine rather than like it depends on what turns you on as a doctor, I think. And there are some doctors that love like ITU and emergency medicine because they're taking someone who's like the legs falling off and
Hmm.
stabilizing them and getting stitching it back on or whatever. That stuff doesn't excite me very much. I much prefer taking someone from functional to optimal. Don't
Hmm.
know why. I just find that more of
Yeah.
an exciting prospect.
But again, that's almost like what we were talking about before. It's like it's not helping that it's not helping someone from get to from five to 20, but it's helping someone who's already functional get to a little bit better. So yeah, I get it. So was studying to be a doctor, was that like, probably, if you look back on all your accomplishments of what you've done, and I say accomplishments because I guess they are, like, you should be proud of what you've achieved. So would being a doctor itself be probably the hardest combination of all of those things?
It took me by surprise, to be honest. I think I was a bit arrogant going into it, thinking like, oh well, I've done a degree before and I got a first, and so I'm smart enough. It'll be all right. I can breeze through this, and it fully had my arse out. Like within the first term of the first year of medicine, it was more stuff to learn and harder than, or more workload in general than the entire 4 year degree that I'd done
Mm-hmm.
before. So it just forces you beyond what you thought that you were capable of, and I suppose you have to do that. Otherwise, it's if you fail in any of the points of the exam, they're pretty brutal with either making you repeat the year or you're just out
Jesus.
entirely. So yeah, a lot of people liken it to drinking from a fire hose, but I think this brings us on to the another answer for what you were saying about kind of picking a picking a skill or a field and nailing as much as you can of it. A lot of this is to do with letting go of that intellectual arrogance and saying there are institutions that have existed for centuries and iterations of that field in the past, led by very smart people and loads of scientists and people driving the field forward. And they've turned it into a system, and that system is larger than any individual person right now. So you can enter a system and come out the other end basically having been like morphed into the shape that system has pushed you through. And it's designed, I mean, in medicine particularly, it's designed as a bit of a conveyor belt, but you come out the other end as a like
Like, best
a
prepared to
unit.
do that thing in a
Yeah,
way. Yeah.
exactly. You're a walking set of algorithms. And so I think finding a system or a framework that has is able to produce the result that you're looking for, and just diving in with it and letting go of the idea of like, oh, I should be able to just figure this out on my own, and in fact leveraging the idea that other people are far smarter than I could ever hope to be, and actually if I put myself in their hands and come out the other end, then I've upgraded myself.
You think that's why we get a lot of nutritionists, not dietitians especially, but nutritionists in particular, or personal trainers that have been on some sort of weekend course or did one module on nutrition, that tend to be so arrogant because they've not even touched that system? Like, because they always, about people that will say, oh, listen to me, don't listen to your doctor. Or they say, your personal trainer is more important than your doctor. And the only argument I've ever heard for that to be maybe like relatable is that they say, how often does, if you're a personal trainer and you see a client 2 or 3 times a week, how often are they seeing their doctor? Nowhere near enough. So that makes you more of a, but yeah, that's a stupid argument. I get it, but
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think there's a there's always the right tool for the job, and certainly some people go to the
right,
doctor
it's
for
a
stuff that
completely
the doctor.
different job. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
you
Yeah.
you'll have someone go to the GP and they say I want to lose weight, and the GP's got 7 minutes with them, and they don't know them, and they've got a whole bunch of medical conditions and a bunch of emotional trauma that's led them to be obese, and you're like, well, what can the GP really do for that person? And so yeah, I guess it's about finding the right tool for the job, and I think personal trainers and um, nutritional coaches definitely have their place for that.
Hmm.
But I think what you're describing there is when someone's done like a level 3 sort of Groupon PT course and then thinks that they can like
Yeah.
give out medical advice. That's just the Dunning Kruger effect in full force, isn't
Yeah,
it?
we've
So
discussed the Dunning-Kruger effect a few times on this podcast, so people should be
nice.
familiar with it. It is that weird level of complete arrogance, but just because and it's not malicious. It's just that you have no idea how much you don't know, and maybe there was a little bit of that arrogance in you when you went to do your medical
Oh yeah,
doctorate.
100%. It fully humbled me, but yeah, exactly. And I think the Dunning Kruger effect is basically watching Tiger Woods swing a golf club about on a field and being like, oh, he's just got a stick and hitting a ball. Like I could do that. It doesn't look too bad. And then you go and try it, and you're like, oh, okay, this is more difficult than I'd even anticipated.
Yeah, and to even tie that back to what we were talking about earlier, I think when we're talking about the achievements and getting to 80% of mastery and all of that, like I think also once you get to 80%, you should be at a level where you appreciate how hard it is to achieve 100%, because you like and that's sort of what allows you to then realize that you probably want to pivot, is your appreciation for how good, like the amount of and now I'm going to throw some shade at the United States rugby players that, or just newbies in general, really. But they, you get good athletes that come into a sport and they think, well, I'm this much of an athlete, I should be able to make professional. And you don't realize like anywhere near how hard it is to actually achieve that level. And
I
like
imagine the
the
better that
work
you
that needs to
get
go
at
in.
rugby, the more you see the pros and like have a kind of deeper appreciation for what they're capable of.
For sure. There is that. There's definitely that. And there's like, but even then, it's like, it's one of those sports where like the better it looks, the simpler it still does look. You don't, and you're never appreciating all the little things. And also because in rugby versus like in individual sports, there's so much chaos because you're one of 15 people on your team. So it's very easy, and I've done this chat with the team that I've been working with, and also with my guys that are members. But like, it's so easy to go into it and blame everyone else and not look at your own mistakes. Because, and then even if it's even if everyone on your team you think was perfect, you can also still then blame the ref. There's also so many different areas that the game can go wrong for you, and that just can be, like have a negative momentum effect. And but it's like it could be physicality, it could be tactical, it could be your skills, it could be your physicality in the close quarters versus your physicality with speed. It could be your fitness, and there's so many different areas that it's very easy to like not appreciate the finer details, if that
So
makes
many moving
sense.
parts to it that,
Yeah.
well, there's I think it was for American football where this news company basically looked out for people tweeting at like NFL players and being like,
Mhm.
"Oh, what an idiot! Like, can't believe he missed that shot. I could have made that from halfway." Um, and so they went and found them and invited them into a stadium.
Ah,
Didn't tell
awesome.
them what they were, what they invited them for, and they were like, "So, on 20th of August, I see that you tweeted
That's
at
awesome.
Neil Crum. He's a dick. I could have made that shot." And he's like, "So here's the ball set up from the same distance that he was. Would you like to have a go?" And they
Yeah.
all absolutely fucked it.
Of course it did. And it's like, but that's where rugby is a little bit like great, but sort of it's not the same as, it's not as quantifiable and easier to break down as like powerlifting. We did an episode a few weeks back on what powerlifters can teach sort of rugby players, and one of the things was like, what's good about powerlifting is that if there's a breaking point in any given lift, and it's a simpler sport, but even then you can make it even simpler by looking at each different lift and then breaking those down and figuring out exactly where it's going wrong. And you can really sort of algorithm the whole process. In fact, that's what's been done. Like I know Chad Wesley Smith has got a program out where it's AI. Everything is AI driven, and they know where you're missing lifts because of how your other lifts are going. Um, because and even that makes it kind of the simplest sport of, you've got to squat, you've got to bench, you've got to deadlift, can still like it's so simple that it can be solved by an algorithm, but that algorithm is not simple, you know?
Yeah, that you can break anything down into its component parts,
Yeah.
and the level of detail just kind of fractally expands more and more.
Yeah. And like, I think, I don't know how we got onto this, but that's sort of like, if you imagine that versus that, you actually imagine the sport of rugby and how many different diverse things can go right or wrong in that, and how wide that scope is. but then that, like, I think that also goes back to, okay, we can bring this back to you being a doctor and saying that, like, there's that wide level of sort of things that people can have go wrong with their health and why they might see a doctor in the first place. And I guess, like, is that something that and this is a criticism people have is of GPs, is because they know so much, it's hard to see where the breaking point is. uh Especially if you say you're only seeing someone for 5 minutes and you're only getting symptoms, you're not getting too much causal data either.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people maybe expect too much from their GPs, like the purpose of a GP from a medical perspective. And it's a shame that the whole medical system has to be defensive, but all of the documentation and a lot of the ways that medicine is practiced is to cover your back because of how litigious people are becoming. I mean, much
Yeah.
more so in the States. Like if you go to the US with a broken finger, you'll come out with a CT of your head, thorax, abdomen, pelvis. Like, they'll do any investigation they can justify for the cash.
Yeah.
Whereas UK, the financial incentives are a bit different, but it's still kind of defensive in that way. So a GP's job is to identify in those 5 minutes, is what this person's coming to me with presenting with something dangerous? Do they need further referral? It's not necessarily, can I get to the root of, like, what is the thing causing this person's problem? Like, great if we can, but there's thousands of things which we don't know why something's happening, and we're like, well, it's not going to kill you, so I'm afraid you're kind of on your own. And that's where someone who has more time with a patient is a lot more better placed to support that person, particularly when a lot of the kind of low grade grumbling physical complaints that people have a huge psychological element to it. And so I know a chiropractor who, he's a bit of a self-hating chiropractor actually, because he doesn't like the field in itself. He feels it's a bit quacky, but he's trained as one. And he says 50% or more of the patients that come through his door are really just coming for mental health issues, kind of expressing as a musculoskeletal complaint. And because he's got half an hour with them or an hour, they can sit and chat to him, and they come out feeling better about their problem because they've been cared for that hour, compared to the GP who's basically not looking at you, googling stuff, and then issuing you a prescription, sending you out the door.
Yeah, that's fascinating actually, because it's one of those things, like, the placebo effect is still an effect, and if someone feels like they're getting treated, then that's almost as good as actually getting treated. Obviously not if you've got a hernia or something, but uh, there is that to it. So then I guess that would be one of the criticisms you could throw at the whole sort of medical system, is that, like, it gets this conveyor belt, but unfortunately now we're seeing how all these other areas can sort of be somewhat superior. And the other criticism I've seen is, like, and sort of the one I thought of myself and actually experienced, is that, like, medical system is very good at stopping people from dying, but
Yeah,
it's not good at bringing someone from, if we're going to go back to the analogy, from 30% to 50%, and it's terrible. And the higher up that mastery scale of being a healthy person you go, the worse it kind of is, right? Because it's, as you say, it's a defensive mechanism.
yeah, exactly. And I think you nailed it, that the medical system is there to prevent you dying. Like, by the time you're in a hospital, you should really be
But
there
even
just
then,
listening.
like, prevent you dying that week, or that, you're right, like, or that month. It's not like, because life is, like, being a healthy person is with the objective really of stopping you from dying, or at least giving you the most quality of life for when you are alive, right?
It's a hard pill to swallow. Pardon the pun there.
That's a great one.
People that people need to be able to kind of take responsibility for their health, and you know their long term health outcomes are not something that you can just take the mick with your body for 50 years and then turn up at the doctor and say, it's your problem now, can you sort me out? Like, there's very limited scope that someone can do to undo 50 years of abuse to your organs. So And I think the generation that we're in is much better with this. Like, I think that the youth of today do take responsibility over their health, but the kind of impression of doctors from our parents and our grandparents is that they could maybe that they're kind of gods and that they can do more than we actually think that they can.
It, but is it also probably the circles that we're surrounded, like rather than a generational thing? You don't think it's just the fact that you're in you have a fitness business, and I'm the same thing, because I find that like we think that, but I'm sure you've seen, having been a GP for some time, that that's actually not the case at all.
Yeah, you're right. I'm kind of tarring people with the same brush there, but certainly there is a difference in the type of people that come to you for coaching, because
Oh
they're
yeah.
they're very, they're putting money on the line. They are so motivated to engage and do what you advise, and that's so different to people who kind of. And I do wonder partly whether this is just because of the way the economics of it is set up. If there's that kind of question that if it cost £50 to go to A&E, would it change the kind of things people are coming in with? You'd end up with problems of both sides. You'd have more false positives and more false negatives. But because you'd have people who just think, oh well, it's 50 quid, so whatever, I'll just go for a free, I'll go for a physical. But then people who are kind of sitting on stuff and can't afford to or whatever won't end up getting through the system. So it's a very hard one to solve.
Well, the answer to that is sat across the other side of the Atlantic from you, because like it's genuinely a case in the States. Is like uh, one of my, in our rugby WhatsApp group, one guy sent a picture to the group with a guy who had a big old cut in his head, and he says, "So, do we think this requires stitches?" Everyone weighed in and said blah blah blah. And then it dawned on me that they're debating whether this guy should go to A&E because he can't be bothered to pay for it or not. And it's like,
Yeah,
that's not a thought that happens anywhere else. So,
rugby players are the worst for this as well. Like, but
yeah.
whenever I've dealt with rugby players in A&E, they're only there because the coach made them, or they're just
Yeah.
like, oh no, I'm fine, and you're like, I've got to check you out here. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Again, and from a medical doctor's perspective, again, if your objective is to give you the least chance of dying, the solution would be stop playing this sport, right? So I think like that goes into line of sort of what I'm thinking anyway, is that people that listen to this podcast, people that find coaching, we're still like in the massive minority, because that's not, I think I've said this on the podcast. If not, I've said it on a Q&A before, but I've had a few guys like over lockdown, really not sure. They're like, I'm not sure if I'm making the progress I need to. Like, I'm going to come back. I'm really worried about getting back to preseason. And every time they've done that, or every person that's done that has come back and been like, oh my God, I'm so much better than everyone else. Because for every person that's actually put in the work, there's also two or three people that have discovered a deep fat fryer, or that have, or have literally not been bothered and just waited. And then obviously the longer that you wait to go to the gym, the easier it is just to never go. And the harder it is to restart every single time. Um, and so like the tendency is to be hard on ourselves, but really even just the fact that you're someone that's proactively seeking a solution, that puts you on a better, like, you got to understand that you're already in a different category, right?
yeah, that's true. Even just turning up, like you're already winning in that sense.
Yeah. And you're taking that 40 getting to 60%, you're putting that 60 kilos on the barbell to get started. So yeah, that would be one of my criticisms. And the other criticism of that doctoral system, the churn, or whatever you called it, the conveyor belt, sorry, is the medical shifts. And I've got some shift workers that I work with, and it is just a complete nightmare to try and sort of organize stuff. Can you speak to, well, firstly, I guess the absurdity that those that we are relying on for our own health are like, surely they're massively compromising their own life quality by being subjective to the shifts that doctors get put through. Or,
Massively. There's two layers of irony with that, isn't there? The first one is that night shifts are proven to be unhealthy. Like they shorten your lifespan. People who work night shifts have shorter lives, they have worse health outcomes. And so it's kind of unavoidable. I guess you have to have someone that covers a hospital at night, but yeah, that's ironic in itself. But the other
Mm.
problem is the switching between days and nights is the thing that kills me particularly.
Yeah.
And you're operating on what feels like 40% of your brain capacity by the third night or the fourth night. And when your job is to assimilate large amounts of information and try and make decisions and rely on your working memory, and all those things are compromised because you're sleep deprived, it's ridiculous. It is so ironic. There's a huge amount of data showing people have more that have higher risk of cardiac events, of car crashes, of mistakes, of all kinds of problems when they're sleep deprived. And there was someone in my hospital actually who he was a registrar who died on the way home from work after a night shift, just driving home. And I don't know if he fell asleep at the wheel or if he was just,
Not paying attention. Yeah. Just knackered.
yeah. So it is silly, and I think part of it we always want to try and find like a way to kind of biohack out of night shifts, but at the end of the day, as soon as I'm able to, I'm gonna try and opt out of them or not. Well, that it dictates the kind of specialties that I would want to train in because I just don't think there's any amount of wage that would make it worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, you're literally sacrificing your life, and if it's not the quality, well, it is the quality, but it's also the quantity. Both have been proven, right? And it's that, and what you said is it's not just if you just did a night shift and that was it. I'm like, yes, you need daylight, but we can sort of reverse engineer some of that and figure out ways to live just your 8 hours, getting those during the day and figuring that out. But it's the complete shifting between the hours. So I'm assuming that's what you have to do as well. So how have you managed to like not only not have people die on your watch as a direct result of the whole system, but also still run a fitness business, keep in shape yourself? Are there any sort of tips that you would give to people that struggle with that?
Yeah, it's not something I'd recommend.
Right. So
Certainly.
firstly, yeah, no, it's a genuinely really important point. It's like, and people don't want to hear it, but it is like change, like find another job. Like
Yeah.
you can do that. Like that is possible. There are many other jobs in the world. You don't have to like people don't have to do shift work. Like if it's because it is that deleterious to everything.
Yeah, this is it. This is it. I think a lot of people will they feel like there's a sense of bravado or admitting defeat or just being like, no, no, like hustle and grind, like I can do this. And if I had the choice, I certainly wouldn't. It's just ended up that I've got a 2-year contract as a hospital doctor that I have to finish before,
Mm-hmm.
well, and luckily I'm very fortunate to be working with a great team of people who are kind of picking up some of the slack with propane. But yeah, so I think number one is pick the life that you
Well, even
want
then,
to
because
enjoy.
you've got your light at the end of the tunnel. So, you know,
Yeah, exactly. I think without that, something would have to give for sure.
mhm.
Um, and I think the way to look at this is you might not be able to have the perfect day set up from the outset, but look at the trajectory of your career in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time, and rather than thinking, what position do I want to be in, or what status do I want, or what salary do I want to be on, think, what do I want my day to look like?
Mhm.
Because that's far more important and far more immediate than any of these kind of second order things. Because if your day looks great, it doesn't really matter what the number on your paycheck is or what the title on your email signature is, because these are all things which they're not going to help you sleep at night. So I think having a hard look at your life and saying, okay, is my current trajectory taking me to the ideal day setup for me? And if not, as you say, you've got a range of choices. You can change that trajectory.
That's like a lot more profound an answer than I was expecting, to be honest. Like, I was expecting, because what I've done with some of my shift workers is like look at map out the next 2 weeks. Okay, wherever you can be consistent and most rested, bank some of that for sleep and some of that for recovery, but then also figure out when you are going to be stressed. Maybe that's when you get your training sessions in, and just be proactive about it. But you've
I
taken
think that's very sensible.
a bigger step back and said, okay, let's be proactive about not just the next 2 weeks, but your whole fucking life, mate. Like,
But I
let's
don't
look
mean
at
to
what
be
do you, no, but
idealistic
it's right.
and say,
It's true. Like we have this choice, and it's sometimes scary that we have this choice, and that's sort of, I guess you could even go back to the very start of this conversation where we said, you were stuck in finance. It's very scary to say, actually, fuck, this isn't making me happy. This isn't what I want to do. What does make me happy, or what would make me serve a life of purpose? Is being a doctor. Okay. And then let's go do that. And it's the
and that
same
was a,
thing with your life, right? Like if you're saying to us that you want to train and you're living a life where you do not have the time to train, like we could, the amount of personal trainers that say that's just an excuse. It's not. It's very real for some people that they just cannot find the time to train. Then you can
yeah.
change it. But then again, like what else are you doing in your off time? Like what else can you do to find that time? And so it doesn't necessarily have to leave it or result in a change of career. It could just be a reprioritization of a few things. Like go look at we were speaking about this before we hit record. Like go look at your phone and your screen time on your phone. Like, is that what you want for your week? Like to spend that much time on your phone? Or is it like maybe
Oh, it's the
going into
most
the gym?
sobering thing, isn't it? To look at that screen time number and be like, oh, wow, okay, I've spent this many hours on these apps. Like,
Yeah.
this is a real wake up call that, as you say, the priorities are out of whack. And that was the same decision I had to make with finance, which was just looking at my boss and saying, okay, if I continue on this trajectory and I do well and I do my homework and I, turn up like a good boy and all that stuff, then I'm going to end up in that guy's position. Do I want to be in his position? Like, he doesn't seem that happy. In fact, he's pretty overworked and quite miserable, and he's out of shape because he's got more hours and all that stuff. So yeah, it's sometimes a bit of a painful one to do. Um, but that time is going to pass anyway, so you may as well make sure you're traveling in the right direction.
And the other good thing is that like it rids you of that sort of weird envy that you would feel of people that are quote unquote having success, because you see their success for the work that they're doing as well and for the sacrifices that they're making that you don't want to make, and that's okay that you don't want to make them.
Mm.
Like
Yeah, a lot of the kind of hustle porn characters online seem to like they've instilled a sense of guilt in everyone by the fact that if you don't want the same level of success that they do, that you're somehow an inferior person. And the kind of subtext, or that's never communicated, is that actually it comes at the cost of peace and happiness. And to be the kind of person who is massively successful requires that you are a highly strung, anxious person that's always on. And so that is the cost that we have to pay.
mhm. I think that sort of still boils down to, or not boils down to, but goes back to what we were talking about before as well with the achieving uh like accomplishments in different realms by being like, this is what I want to achieve, and it's not as hard as you think. Like you can still live an enjoyable life, live a happy, and if you, especially if it's something that you want to do, like it's not, it doesn't have to be a grind. It can be an enjoyable process as well, right? um
Derek Sivers talks about him doing he did a bike ride every day or whatever, and it took him 43 minutes, and that's when he was like absolutely blasting it, like he was really going for it. It was quite unpleasant, and he'd come back, and then one day he decided to like just be a bit leisurely with it, like rather than completely knacking himself on the bike ride, he would just go a bit slower, and he stopped for a minute or two just to look at the sun, and he came back and he said his time for that same distance was like 48 minutes. And so he was like, oh, so it's actually only like 4 minutes slower to just have a much nicer time. to be
Yeah.
putting in 70 or 80% of the effort and not killing myself in this bike ride and still get most of the result. So yeah, that if you really have to be the top 0.01% of performers, then yeah, you're going to have to grind, and it's the diminishing returns. It comes at a huge cost. But
Yeah. But you're
I,
happier. And it's also like you've got that room, like, you've got that room then to, and your example uses more time, but most of the time it's like, it's actually, you get more fun results because you're not like going into the gym 10 times a week, or you're not putting 12 sessions in a week. You're actually just doing the bare minimum. But the people sort of get upset at the idea of only doing the minimum. But if you're still getting better, like, that is still, number one, it's getting better, but that's still better. And as we touched on earlier, that's still so much better than what most people are doing. That then, if you have the time to, because you've freed up from only doing the minimum and investing that in other realms, then all of a sudden, like, and this is where it sort of ties perfectly into rugby strength and conditioning. Like, if you're the amount of work that you would have to put in to get a 220 kilo bench press, say, like, if you only have to worry about only getting maybe a 100 kilo bench press, all of that free time has suddenly been freed up. And that could be spent on getting fitter or getting faster. And all of a sudden now you're making real massive improvements towards your actual goal of these diverse realms.
yeah, and a lot of rugby players, particularly the competitive ones, are going to be type A personalities that want to always overperform and spend more time in the gym if they can.
Yep.
But we're operating on the assumption that our recovery capacity is this just infinite ditch that you can just keep digging into. But it's not the case. I mean, Mike Israetel explains this concept perfectly, which is that you should always be training between your minimum effective volume and your maximum recoverable volume. So
Mm-hmm.
what those two numbers are, right, is what's the minimum that you could get away with doing in the gym and still make gains. And then there's a point you can keep adding sets and keep adding work up to a point where you're hitting the maximum speed of gains that you could possibly achieve. If you add in more sets, it's not gonna move the ship any faster. And
Mm-hmm.
if you add in more sets than that, it's probably going to injure you, or it's going to dig into your recovery more than you can recover from. So being able to recognize, like, okay, I'm doing enough for this goal, and actually adding more is not going to be helpful. How can I take these units of energy and input and turn them into something that's going to be more productive? And I think in most athletes' case, that's going to be, how can I recover harder? How can I do the yin
Mm-hmm.
stuff and like really optimize my sleep and really nail my relaxation and my off time so that I can perform at my best when I have to.
What's cool that you said there is, you said, how hard I can recover. Uh, and most people would have heard that and thought, oh, okay, so I've got to go into the sauna and do my ice baths and do all of that stuff. And then all you said was sleep and relax, because that's what recovering is.
Yeah.
It's not worrying, like, it's not stressing out, like, and getting in an ice bath and trying to do more. Because again, that's just another perpetuation of the hustle porn is, oh, recover, but recover hard. Like, no, stop it.
Yeah,
Let me
exactly. How
just
how
sleep, for
long can I
fuck's
sit in the ice
sake.
bath for, and how, and from I've got a video coming out about DOMs this week, and the the kind of conclusion was that ice and ice baths don't help with um, long term muscle recovery. They might they might help you not be sore the next day, but they're only doing that because they're interfering with the mechanisms of hypertrophy that will actually make you perform better long term. So
The reason that you're in the gym in the first place.
yeah,
Yeah. So you're now doing an ice bath, which is more, to do more in the gym to get less results. Whereas if you actually,
completely
like,
pointless.
remove the ice bath, remove the extra training sessions, and you actually get better results. Like, and that, like, systematically in itself sort of encompasses everything that we're sort of discussing here. So that's interesting. Have
Yeah.
you done lots of ice baths? I know you've done so many different self-experimentation sort of protocols. Slept on the floor, meditation retreats. Like, I think you must have done some sort of ice bath. Oh, you're a Wim Hof guy, right?
Yeah, so I have done the Wim Hof approach, which for anyone who doesn't know who he is, he's a guy from Holland whose his wife died, and he decided for some reason to make friends with the ice. That was his kind of phrasing, and he now holds the record for longest time in cold immersion, and he often just goes out to snowy mountains in his shorts and just travels around and stuff. And he's come up with a breathing method. So his process was 10 weeks of progressive cold exposure with a certain breathing pattern, and it's kind of meant to just make you feel good and improve your immune response acutely. He's developed a bit of a weird cult following since then. I think it's kind of disproportionate to what he's what he's offering, but you know, internet's a weird place. And I did his approach for about 10 weeks to the letter, which was the cold exposure. Yeah, it's fun. It feels like caffeine. I certainly wouldn't treat it as a recovery thing, although most people like to try and think it is, but it's just another way to bash your head against the grindstone, like a way to acutely raise your cortisol and, you know, dive into something hard. But the benefit of it, the main one, is like if you've seen Fight Club, where Tyler says after a fight, the volume in life has been turned down. So you do something in the like 6 in the morning, you step into a cold shower or an ice bath. By the time you're out of that, everything else in the day is actually a bit of a breeze.
So it's like even that like is almost they getting to 80%. If you could just do 80% Wim Hof, right? You just do the meditation and get a bit of cold exposure. Like you don't have to go full Wim Hof to get like those how hard that is to get those extra benefits of whatever he's doing with his is it his brown fat metabolism or something going in there, and he's able to adjust his white blood cells as well or something. I don't know, like, but that's like how exponentially harder it is just to go fully Wim Hof versus just getting a bit of cold in you, doing a bit of meditation. I imagine is like, again, that's probably the trick, right?
Yeah, this is the choice of like, do you want to make being cold your hobby, or are you just doing it as a bit of fun? In which case, yeah, you can get most of the benefit without having to hammer it.
So I guess what other sort of experiments have you gone into that you again find that 80%, or have you found any where you've actually bought into it 100%, where you've said, okay, I really want to achieve mastery in this, or this is actually as good as what it claimed to be? Because I know it's definitely not Jaws size.
Yeah, definitely not Jaws size. I think meditation retreats. So that was I'd been a meditator for some time before that. I can't remember how many hours I'd done, maybe 600 or 700 in total by that point, and then did the meditation retreat, which was 10 days of 10 hours a day with the monks, silent retreat, 2 meals a day, and that was kind of a blast and cruise thing where you go in for that time, you level up your practice, you level up the quality of your consciousness, and then you go back into the real world. And that is the kind of thing that I do wish I could go 100% with. And I think that meditation is one of those things where the curve of returns is not, it's not just a normal diminishing returns. It's kind of, it has like peaks and troughs. So if you did 3 hours a day for a few months, you would get increasing returns for some time, and then it takes momentum of its own. But I'm just a little willy. That's the reason that's the only reason I don't do that. Just because it's boring, because it's hard. Behaviorally, I talk myself out of doing it, but I'm very much sold on the benefits of it. And at the end of the day, I think I just need some accountability with it. The same as you hear about the guy who wasn't able to work at home. He couldn't focus on his work, so he hired someone for like £8 an hour to sit next to him and slap him every time he went off task. So he was like,
No.
I need to be on Excel. If I'm not on Excel, if I switch window, slap me. And he said she didn't slap him once throughout the day.
That's, yeah, that's actually just being kept accountable is crazy. But it's also like I was more thinking about when you were talking about being a little willy, because like if I'd have written down the thoughts that are going through my head that somehow stopped me from doing my meditation this morning for about 45 minutes of just random procrastination before I finally sat down for 25 minutes that I'm sold on already, that I know is going to be better for me. It is it is ridiculous, but
And you
it's
look back on those 45 minutes beforehand and you're like, I could have been meditating. I could have had an
I
absolute
know.
mammoth meditation session there. And instead, what was I doing? Like rearranging the cereals in the kitchen or, something stupid.
And I always feel better when I finish. I always feel better like once I've finished my meditation. Like I've never gone and gone, oh, that was shit. That was a waste of time. Never. I don't think I've ever, like,
It's
even like
insane, isn't it?
the quote unquote bad sits. Yeah, it is it's the brain, man. It's
It's the
such a
same two voices as like the nighttime TJ at 1 a.m. who's like, oh, I'll just check my emails a bit more and I'll just do this or whatever. And then there's the 6 a.m. TJ who's like, why didn't I go to bed earlier?
yeah, yeah. And I guess like it does all come down to two things, I think. And I think what I try and sell people with Rugby Muscle in terms of like how they should treat themselves and their training and their diet as well can be applied to everything. And it's number one, being proactive in the short term. Like if I've got a schedule for the next day at 6 a.m. where I've got something to do at 6 a.m., like even if it's like bullshit, if it's in my calendar, I'm way more likely to go to bed early and get that all sorted. Um, and then also like being as proactive as you can in the short term, putting your sessions in a calendar, like doing that sort of stuff, or even just having sessions planned out, which so many people don't. And then it's long-term periodization. So I imagine that like what you were saying about the retreats, and those sorts of things, like that's almost periodization for meditation. Like you said, there's sometimes you have exponential benefit by doing 3 hours for a few months. Would you actually say that these people could do three? I guess it's just not practical to do 3 hours a day every single day, right?
What's really frustrating about that particular claim is at the end of the 10-day retreat, they were like, right guys, you've got some good hours in here. We recommend 2 hours a day from here on in. And you'll be able to do it because you'll be an hour more productive and you'll sleep an hour less. So and you're like, oh mate, like I've got no object, like, I've got no
It makes
argument now. I
sense. Yeah.
can't. Yeah.
That is, it's
And
so
yet
true with the
you do it.
productivity thing. Like, same with physical activity as well. Like training in the morning, like everyone is better. Like even, well, if you look at Japan, like they make their staff do aerobics and stuff before work anyway, because that makes them more productive. Like,
When it's like government enforced because they know it works, makes people productive. Like that's a yeah.
yeah,
And yet we so I think yeah, you're right. Like a lot of it is just about managing our behavior and staying accountable even to ourselves, like you said with your calendar, to just make sure that we turn up and do the thing.
but and then even I guess even taking another step back from that. So it's being proactive in the short term, putting stuff in your short term calendar, getting periodization down, knowing what you're trying to do for the next few months, so you're not following like sort of shiny up. You're not just trying the next butterfly that's flying around. And then even further, taking another step back is what actually do you want out of all of this? And it's those three steps that are really difficult because they stop you from just being a part of the noise, but like profoundly, like ridiculously beneficial. And it doesn't stop, right? So you don't just do it once and go, okay, I'm done. Like it's a daily thing, I guess.
Yeah, got to be constantly reminding yourself that the main thing is the main thing. And I think that's where the value in having a an annual target or a 3-year goal and driving everything towards that, so that when you wake up on your kind of most dopey day, when you're not really
Mm-hmm.
kind of aware of what's, because you can't expect yourself to always have this high level planning module in your head at all times. And so knowing that you can just turn up and do what you need to do because you've separated the planning from the execution is key.
And like it still works. Like if you're only like if you only got to get in 2 gym sessions a week, like that infinitely that straight away makes your week so much easier. And it means that you can be less hard on yourself, because that's the other problem, is that like it's very easy to just follow that noise and constantly be in this sort of cycle of sabotage and then being hard on yourself and then setting an unrealistic like expectation of yourself and then an unrealistic expectation of what you can achieve and what you can actually do to achieve that. Like we all fall for it. And it's why we sort of have to rely on things like Headspace, where they say, oh, just meditate for 5 minutes a day, or they've got like 30-second meditations as well, and to sort of kid people in. I know this isn't like, I get this is something I did want to discuss with you, because I know you've spoken to a number of meditation experts. Is that like the equivalent of doing 30-second abs for meditation benefits? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I'm a bit conflicted about this because I definitely agree that like with certain habits, just getting the habit done is more important than doing it for a long time. So I think maybe with something like tidying, if you could say I'm just going to do 1 minute of tidying every day, would mean that you over time you would accumulate and you'd make some progress with it. And often once you've done a minute, you're like, oh, I may as well continue because I've got the momentum now. But with meditating, yeah, I think it's more like 6 minute abs or 30-second abs, in that you probably, I can see the James Clear mentality of like, if you just do a tiny bit, the barriers to doing it is low, so it's low friction to just getting started. But do that for a month and you'll be like, well, this is pointless, like I'm not feeling any benefit from it. So you could, depending on your mentality, flip it the other way. And this is what me and my business partner Johnny were talking about. He came to me and he was like, Yusef, I'm meditating like 3 minutes in the mornings and I'm not really feeling it. I feel like it's maybe just a scam. I don't think meditation does anything. And I was like, well, right, you're pissing around with 3 minutes in the mornings. Just for the next 10 days, do 30 minutes every day, and then come back to me in 10 days and tell me you don't feel any different. And he was like, right, screw you, fine, I'm going to do that. And then he did, and he was like, yep, fine, I'm sold. So sometimes it could just take a bit of overwhelming effort to say, I'm going to do enough to actually get a result here. And then that result becomes the motivator.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like there's a reason I'm not saying you can only go to the gym one time a month, right? Like that isn't going to get you the benefit. Like there has to be some sort of minimum there somewhere, like expectation of what you want to put in. And I think that's another thing that people get missold a lot, I guess, with both the apps of the meditation and with 6 minute abs or whatever it is. It's like there is acknowledgement of some sort of level of effort that you have to put in is fucking really important.
Yeah.
Even to get to 80%, like you don't even have to worry about the 100, but just to get to 80% still requires a good deal of work. But then also it's more about, at that point, it's about the consistency, right? It's like the level that you have to put in is just has to be rigorously consistent, as opposed to working your ass off for 2 weeks.
Yeah, and to do that, you've got to be sold on the practice or on the result.
Right. Yeah. Because most people aren't, because most people want benefits right away. And it's once you acknowledge that it's the long term, like that's the good thing about setting yourself that 1 year or 3 year goal, is that like, who gives a fuck like what you do today? Like if you miss a session, it's okay. Like a new sort of thought experiment I've been playing with a lot of people is like, how much are you going to benefit from this one training session? Like nothing. Like not really. That's not, you're not achieving anything in that one session, but it's the weeks of the sessions that add up that give you the benefit. And it's the same thing for anything really, I guess. It's like how much, like go back to you in medical school, like how much do you learn in one class? Probably not that much because you're so overwhelmed. But once you get those things in place over time, after how many years is it? You have to.
So for me, it was 6 years. And yeah, you're right, because it's a spiral curriculum. So each each time you go up a year, you're going over the same systems, but one layer deeper or one layer more. So yeah, things kind of they. If you just did the first year of medicine, you'd have a bunch of niche knowledge about stuff that isn't that applicable. But combine that with years 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then you're like, oh, okay, something's clicked now, and it's all fits together.
Interesting. So I guess is that the hardest thing about all of this is figuring out like that lowest barrier to entry that you said you have my kids retail minimum effective volume of whatever and finding out what you want to achieve, like, and then sticking with that. Like those are the, I
Yeah,
guess that's.
I think that's it. And as I say, luckily most things the path is laid out really well. If you want to get into your best shape for rugby and perform at your best, like the path is laid out by you. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can hire TJ and be like, all now my responsibility is actually turning up and doing the work, rather than having the additional burden of figuring out what is the work I'm supposed to do and then try and do it. Because if you do that, particularly with your training, you're going to be second guessing yourself as well. Martin Burkhan, the Lean Gains founder, would basically keep a folder of his own name on his computer called Martin and treat it like any other client. So he would have his folder in with his client folder when he's managing his own diet and stuff, because he was like, otherwise I'll just sit and tinker with it all day.
Yeah, I have a coach for that same process, like, or to help with that same thing, because and then it becomes, it's still, and I think the word experiment is where it gets lost. It's still self-experimentation, but it's like, it's not an experiment where you're completely coming up with everything yourself. It's like the experiment you do in chemistry in like year 2, where they don't do chemistry in year 2, but get my point.
Yeah, you know what the outcome's going to be, and you're following a framework.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's so, and sometimes that the outcome might not actually be what you expected, but because you followed the guideline, you should be able to look back and figure out where it went wrong and then therefore correct it. Or you realize, I don't actually want to do that. You can move on. But yeah, self-experimentation is cool, but when it's done and done effectively, I guess.
And there's a huge psychological burden that's lifted when you hire a coach, because you're just like, oh, brilliant. Like, they'll do the decision making and the thinking and stuff, and I can just turn up and do my sessions. And it's brilliant. You get the objectivity. It's not even like, I imagine the reason that you hired a coach is not, like, for your training, is not because of a deficit of knowledge particularly. It's just that you want someone to be able to handle it for you, and then you've got the objectivity and you're accountable to someone.
It saves me so much time, because I get like, and it's funny that that's actually what happens, because I know that's what happens when you hire a coach, because literally every single client I work with, outside of the people that are sort of just getting their hooks into getting fit and stuff, the vast majority of people like have said, how much time I've saved them. That, like, I didn't realize that would be the benefit of me being the coach, but it appears to be. And then it makes sense, because it's the exact same thing for me, because I'm getting stronger and I'm only doing 2 or 3 like proper strength sessions a week. Like, and if I was in control, I'd be saying, okay, I'm getting stronger. I'm only doing 2 or 3. Why shouldn't I do 4 or 5? Like, I can do it. I've got time. But there's simply no need, and that's something people don't, because now I can spend that time either recovering, focusing on my work, doing so many different things. Right now, I'm running a shit ton, and trying to surf and do jiu-jitsu. Like, there's so many other things that I don't need to be, that I can be doing, that don't need to be training for strength because I'm already getting better. I'm still
Yeah.
getting better. So
Mike
yeah,
Kisratel talked about he was like, if someone offered you two burritos that are exactly the same, totally identical, but one is $3, one's $7, like why would you buy the $7 one? Like it's the same.
yeah, yeah. I'm not gonna get like at my training age, just getting stronger, full stop, is fucking huge.
Brilliant, yeah.
Like I don't like why do I need to eat into my recovery or my time more? Like if I can just continue following that path, saving time, it's ridiculous. So yeah, I'm selling myself again on my own things that I'm already doing. Um, yeah. So I guess that I mean we're run over a little bit, but I don't. I'll get into the last three questions if you've still got the time for them.
Yeah, let's do it.
So health and fitness in 20 years time, what does it look like?
Oh, you know what, TJ? I think this is either a very scary answer or it's a very empowering one, and I don't know which way it's going to go. So we're seeing the advent of tracking devices, and I think what this is going to do is there we go, the Aura Ring. So that's either going to open up a world of preemptive medicine, crowdsourcing of medical science, bringing together like people's constant data points and figuring out what's causing disease very early on and changing the course of medicine so that we're no longer reactive and we're becoming more proactive. But the other risk of that is that rather than this being a kind of open sourced source of data, it goes the other way, and
Mm-hmm.
that data is then used to fuel privatized healthcare insurance companies and not benefit the patient so much. So, for example, when you have to do a capture, you try and log into something and it says, "Oh, click on all the fire hydrants, click on all the
Mm-hmm.
bicycles, whatever." The system already knows that you're a human from the movement of your mouse. But the reason it's always road related, like bridges and traffic lights and stuff, is that they're training the AI for the self-driving cars, which is kind of annoying because it's
I
like,
hate that. I know.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just being used as a workforce. So there's that, but also what they're finding now is they're able to pick up on very subtle tremors of the mouse, whether someone has very kind of pre-early onset, pre-symptomatic Parkinson's disease.
Oh
Now,
no way.
there's an ethical question there of what do you do with that bit of information? Do you pass it on to the person's insurer? Do you tell the patient? Because do they have a right to know that? There's so many questions, and until those questions are nailed, we're going to end up with a situation where data companies, social media companies, have more information about our health than we do. And I I don't know. I think it depends really on whether the whole Apple Android model of consumer data starts
Mm-hmm.
to prevail.
Mm. It's interesting because I literally started wearing this again like last week because I packed it in after a while because I just realized I'm like this isn't monitoring my sleep. It isn't really helping me in any way. Like it's not giving me any feedback that I wouldn't be doing anyway. And then when I got my I got this is a Garmin as well, which is I use it for my running and stuff. I was like, this isn't giving me anything that my Garmin isn't giving me. I'm just going to sack it off. And then the other day, um, I was listening to a podcast from some sort of longevity expert. I can't remember who it was, but he was saying at the end of the day, this is still giving me data. If I'm not paying attention to it, I'm still collecting more and more and more health data that, if I wore this for 10 years, like that's an incredible amount of data that it's got on me. And even if, it's not accurate in terms of what it interprets out of the data now, just having that data could be like huge. And we said
Yeah,
about
and there's no
the
downside to it. Like you've
right.
got you. I mean, as far as wearing a watch, that's not a massive inconvenience, really. So
No, yeah. And like in 10 years' time, if they understand a little bit more of what to do with it, and I go see the GP with a problem that, he can then sift through. I'm assuming he's not going to sift through the actual raw data itself, but there'll be some sort of output, hopefully, that gets put in his direction, and therefore we can actually get a lot better about predicting this stuff then.
Yeah, I hope so, and I just hope it falls into the right hands. I guess that's the key.
I
But
think inevitably it must be able to. In 20 years, I think it will go wrong before it probably. Oh, it's already going wrong, right? But it will then go right.
yeah, I
Um,
suppose it's got to calibrate at some point, doesn't it?
I would like to think so, but that's super interesting. What about the realm of like actual fitness? Because Johnny seemed to be pretty bleak when I asked him about it. He was like, it'll just be all the same. Eventually, I think I talked him into the appetite control pills that we'll get to. But
Yeah,
outside of
that's that,
that, like
that is a
people
good point,
still want
actually.
to get fit and they'll still be just as missold because there's money to be, there's more, so much, like the vast majority of the fitness industry, like the vast majority of money is made on mis-selling people. Like, think how popular V Shred is, and think how still like all that nonsense is still like at the forefront. It's not like it's like
Yeah,
yeah. So what we were saying earlier, we think we're getting somewhere, but actually, it's just we're changing the circle of people that we're hanging around with. Not
I think that's a very wise way of looking at it. That the fundamentals of human nature of looking for the shortcut and looking for the magic pill are always going to be there, and in 20 years that's not going to change. So if there's a route for people and marketers to exploit that, they will in 20
yeah.
years just with better technology. Maybe, and this this depends on the kind of course of development of peptides. Um, there may be some big changes in, as you say, drugs that improve appetite control, drugs that improve or reduce sarcopenia. These kind of things that could affect
Hmm.
people's health outcomes. But at the end of the day, it's going to be very hard to replace exercise in terms of the kind of multi-system cascade of stuff that happens. So you'll still just have the same people exercising, and you'll still have a subset of people that just won't, regardless. And you know, as people become more wealthy, as a as humans, as we become generally like the standard
Hmm.
of living improves, more and more people exercise, more people take their health seriously. So hopefully it'll continue on the positive trend that we're seeing this decade. But then again, like food engineering and the ability to make us all obese has also got much better in the last 20, 30 years. So it'll kind of be a race between those two.
Yeah, and then even then with the food engineering though, like think about the like the fact that Halo Top, the ice cream or Quest bars exist. Like if you'd have told me they exist like 20 years ago, like and how they're everywhere now, and like the macros and some of them, they're still not quite there. You've still not got this cheap bar that tastes amazing that has the best macros. Like you've always got to sacrifice one of those things,
Yeah,
but still, I don't know. I'm getting
it's never
bullish on
gonna
it now.
like people are still drinking full sugar Coke.
That's
That
so
boggles
true.
my mind.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
that's
it's the same as Diet Coke, and then people are like, oh no, I don't like Diet Coke. And you're like, it's it's the same drink.
I
Like,
literally saw yesterday a comment of someone saying, I've never seen a skinny person drink a Diet Coke. And I'm just like, that's firstly massively untrue. And it's so like the wrong thought process in so many ways. Uh,
yeah, I don't even know what their point is with that.
and then also, yeah, and like protein powder as well is like like, or just in general, like whey protein. I think that will, there's so many ways of making our lives slightly easier that they'll add up. But at the end of the day, the big struggles will still be, I guess, the big struggles, and it's the suffering of others doesn't actually lessen the suffering of yourself. So your suffering is still your suffering. So it's still going to be just as difficult, but the actual way or the way we recognize it will be just as difficult, but the actual mechanisms will probably still be significantly easier, I reckon.
Yeah, I think that's right. It might become slightly more convenient, but you still got to do the work.
Yeah, that's bang on. All right. What's one song everyone needs on their gym playlist?
Wanna Play by The Prophet.
Ooh,
That is an absolute banger.
Okay, interesting.
Would recommend.
Johnny, the one Johnny recommended nearly blew my ears out. But
I can imagine. Yeah.
no, he put me onto some angry stuff. Alex Viada put me onto something that was ridiculously aggressive, but also I think it had a banjo solo in the middle of it. So
Can't beat it then. That sounds like the
yeah,
perfect song.
yeah. But this playlist is getting more and more ridiculous. Let me one more time. What is it? I'm gonna make
So
sure
it's called Wanna Play by The Prophet.
play. Okay, we'll get on that. And then finally,
Make
how
a
can
public
listeners?
playlist.
Yeah, I'm putting it together now. We've got enough songs.
Oh, fantastic.
Cindy Lauper's on there as well, though. So
I guess you get quite a range, yeah.
yeah, but I think that's the point. Is that like, well, the point of Cindy Lauper with being on there is that like you're not supposed to be ready to lift because of the music that you listen to. You should be ready to lift anyway.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, how can listeners get in touch and follow more of your wacky experiments, or find out if they want to start an online fitness business, or if they want to if they're a busy professional just wants to lose weight?
At Propane Fitness across any channel. So I think out of all the channels, I'd recommend YouTube and Twitter, probably the most fun. But we have an Instagram as well. So that's Propane, as in the gas. Propane Fitness.
Okay. I'll put those all in the links below.
Amazing. We
I'm
try to respond to all messages and comments and stuff too. So do get in touch if there's anything we can help with.
All right. Yeah. People that have Twitter have been dying for someone on Twitter, I'm sure, because I never even acknowledge its existence. I think I'm surprised that you said it's the best. It's so negative. It's like,
Yeah, it certainly can be
I think
a
it's,
bit of a black hole if you follow the wrong people.
and the more I think about it, the more I realize why, because it's like a lot less personal, because at least on Instagram, you see people's face, most aggressive posts on Instagram are still just going to be the text feature.
Yeah,
They're never people actually saying like their aggressive things, because you don't want to, it's not in our nature to do that stuff.
it's just keyboard warrior syndrome, isn't it? Like it's always anonymous accounts that give it the big in, and I've found with Twitter using the certain trigger words. So whenever I tweet about vaccines or certain things that are the hot buttons for the internet, I get a bunch of angry
Vegan.
DMs and comments and stuff. But
I know. I love that the idea in my head of people going onto Twitter, searching for a particular topic that they're passionate about, and then finding everyone that dislikes that topic or doesn't agree with their views, just get really angry. Like,
yeah, but
what are
what a
you
way to
doing?
live your life!
What?
Like how to stress yourself out 101.
I don't think that person has taken their 3-year plan and figured out what they actually want to do on their day to day with their life. What, like, you could take 1 billion people, not one person would say that would be what they want to do with their day. No,
Yeah.
maybe there is.
If you ask enough people, there'll be someone who just loves doing that.
So that's my fucking jam. Like, that's what I want to do. And then that's how big the internet is, because there's enough of those people that they find you.
That's it. Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, mate, it's been great talking to you.
It's
Really
been an
enjoyed
absolute
this
pleasure,
one.
man. Me too.
Yeah. So go follow Yusef. Go follow Propane Fitness. Follow the weird experiments he has. The YouTube's that's my favorite one. So yeah, go follow there, and thank you for coming on, mate.